All right, so we cannot have digital engineering without having a digital engineering workforce. So what I wanted to talk about is a paper that is going to be coming out in the next couple of months, hopefully, currently under review, on digital engineering workforce development challenges, best practices, and recommendation. And that paper actually came from a number of panels that we had on digital engineering workforce development. First panel actually started here at SciTech in 2023. And then we also had a series of panels as part of the Data and Digital Summit in 2023, 2024. So the intent here again was to make sure we collect the outcome of those panels, but also make sure we engage participants from industry, government, and academia to really document best practices, challenges, and importantly, a set of recommendations on how we move forward on this. All right. So as far as this paper, we actually covered a number of themes that are represented here. The first one is competencies required for a digital engineering workforce. We first outlined competencies needed for what we believe is a successful workforce, things that encompass technical proficiency, data literacy, system thinking, and collaborative skills. We stressed out the importance of literacy, again, in model-based engineering and model-based systems engineering in particular, emphasizing comprehension and composition as key elements for problem solving in digital engineering. The second theme is challenges in developing a digital engineering workforce. And in this one, we actually delved into the challenges hindering digital engineering workforce development, things like gaps in education and training, the rapid technological advancement, and then what we foresee a lot is cultural resistance as well. Another theme is managing and integrating emerging and maturing technologies. Again, we talk about the need for strategic assessment, planning and integration of emerging technologies with a focus on fostering a culture of continuous learning and adaptation within organization. And we also particularly suggest integrating these technologies into existing disciplines rather than just creating more separate silos, which we hope will lead to a higher rate in adoption of those technologies. And then obviously digital engineering competency is also key to enable the development of this workforce. So we kind of review existing competency frameworks, we highlight their strengths and their weaknesses, and we actually recommend the establishment of a standardized framework for defining and assessing digital skills across the aerospace industry. We also have a number of success stories that showcase successful workforce development strategies within academia, industry, and government. And then finally, we provide a set of recommendations on how we can accelerate the development of this digital engineering workforce. All right, look at there. Perfect. So the first recommendation is to augment industry-specific digital engineering competency framework. And so we recommend augmenting the competency frameworks that already exist and make sure that we address gaps that are specific to the aerospace industry and encourage industry-wide standardization of education and training. The second recommendation, not sure when, here we go, is to develop a digital engineering taxonomy. And so we recommend developing working relationship with relevant and established professional societies and their respective working group to guide the development of a digital engineering taxonomy. And then we actually started doing this just last night with Nkosi, working on what could be a digital engineering taxonomy that encompasses discipline involved. So the reason for this is promoting a shared understanding and providing a common language that will allow engineers and stakeholders and collaborators across diverse organizations and domains to communicate effectively. Another advantage of such a taxonomy would be to provide more effective knowledge capture and aid in preserving institutional memory. And then finally, being able to accelerate workforce development by clarifying what are the essential competencies, skill set, and knowledge gaps and areas that needs to be addressed. All right. The third recommendation is to develop and showcase digital engineering operational vision. And so the intent here is that rather than telling they're showing, demonstrate through tangible example and use cases what a successful implementation of digital engineering looks like, and also provide a clear vision along with real-world application and benefits to inspire workforce adoption. The next one is creating digital engineering sandboxes. The intent here is to tailor those, create those sandboxes tailored for students and practitioners as an interactive space for learning, experimentation, and knowledge sharing. Those sandboxes should facilitate understanding and reproducibility of the content, building on foundational concepts, insights, and best practices discussed in relevant literature as well as in the different bodies of knowledge. They should provide users with scope principles and practical model-based implementation example to encourage knowledge reuse, skill building, and collaborative engagement across the digital engineering community. Now, the next one is leveraging tool and methodology to accelerate and facilitate learning. It's one thing to talk about the benefits of model-based system engineering. For example, it's another one to put the tools in the hands of the people who are going to be using those tools. So make sure, again, that we can actually put the tools in the hands of the practitioners. Foster interdisciplinary collaboration. Obviously, we need to be able to break down the traditional academic and disciplinary silos, encourage collaboration between engineering, computer science, data science, and other relevant disciplines to provide and develop comprehensive solutions and well-rounded education for digital engineering professionals. Promote collaboration between stakeholders. That goes without saying that we need to strengthen collaboration between academia, industry, government, and professional associations and societies to kind of facilitate the exchange of knowledge, resource, and expertise, guide the updating of development of curricula, share relevant digital engineering concepts and tools used in industry and government, and then encourage interdisciplinary learning and project-based education. When it comes to academic education in particular, we need to start modernizing curricular standards. We need to reassess, we need to update undergraduate, in particular curricula, to incorporate fundamental systems engineering concepts and principles, system thinking, and hands-on experience with digital engineering tools and technologies. Leverage blameless postmortem for lessons learned sharing. We want to promote a culture of continuous improvement and actionable outcomes by promoting a psychologically safe environment where lessons learned from both successes and failures can be openly shared. And last but not least, obviously promoting diversity. We need to be able to bring together a broader range of perspectives and experiences that we will enhance innovation and problem solving. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. Next up is Dr. Suzette Johnson from Northrop Grumman, a co-author of the amazing book, Industrial DevOps.
All right, so first of all, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. I appreciate that. I have worked for Northrop over 20 years now. I am a fellow for Lean, Agile, and Digital Integration. And I am also, if you're familiar with the National Defense Industrial Association, I am also the newly appointed or elected chair for the Systems Engineering Division. So I'm so excited for that journey as well. So I'm going to, I actually tried, so I have one slide, but I actually took 3 slides and put it into one. So I'm going to share with you the experiences, the observations, and the lessons learned that I've had throughout this amazing journey at Northrop Grumman. And with the industry, I've collaborated a lot through conferences and other industry partners as well. And excuse me, I'm going to start with the sort of eye chart there of the Lean, Agile, COE. So within Northrop Grumman, my journey started with Agile back in 2005. And that was so important because we were responsible for delivering a mission. And the traditional ways of working we knew would not work for us. And I had an amazing government lead who came and said, you know, we need to do things differently. Can you write an engineering process for us that we can deliver capabilities? At that time, we wanted to get something out in 6 months and then deliver quarterly, right? So back in 2005, that was a pretty tall order. Stumbled across this Agile thing, right? And that, he's like, let's do it because we have to work differently, and we know we won't be successful if we don't start thinking differently about how we are developing and delivering capabilities. Again, software-centric, 2005, on that early journey. And they were wildly successful quarter after quarter, year after year. As part of that journey, though, I had a problem to solve, which was how do I get systems engineering? Because we kind of understood Agile and software at the time, but what did it mean for Agile and systems engineering? And how do I do requirements differently? So that actually evolved into what we call our Lean Agile, excuse me, community of practice. I got 30 people together. And we're like, okay, how do we evolve these practices out of software into some of the engineering practices? And that was really important. Again, we were like-minded, we had a problem to solve, just like groups here at this conference are doing, right? Trying to attack these different problems in digital engineering. That COP, that community of practice of sharing experiences and lessons learned within Northrop Grumman, grew from 30 people when we started there in January 23, 2008, grew to 13,000 people now within the company are part of this community of practice. Obviously, they don't all call in every day or every week when we meet, every other week, excuse me. But that was such an important journey because as we were taking those lessons learned from software, we started thinking about, well, how does this apply then in cyber physical systems? How do we start taking it from just software into other functions as well? We had learned that because working on a radar program we had seen where we had become agile in software, we were implementing these digital capabilities, we could automate and do things better, but the rest of the ecosystem had not evolved with us. So then it became, how do we do this transformation not just in one functional area, but across our functions? However, we talk about culture, and changing culture is really about changing behavior. And it's not just the behavior and the practices of the workforce itself, the people that are developing the product, it's also the leadership and the managers who manage and work with those people. So that is why there you see that red circle around Lead in the Digital Age community of practice, because now it's really focusing, a new area of focus is how do we help our managers understand what it means to lead in the digital age. What are the leadership skills and behaviors we want in terms of empathy, leading by example, creating environments of psychological safety, creating environments of a continuous improvement, where it's okay to show when things aren't working and where we need to have improvements. So now we're really targeting that workforce of, okay, you're a manager or even some of our more senior leaders, what does it mean to implement these leadership behaviors, to embrace these digital technologies, and how are we actually using it to drive towards business outcomes? Because at the end of the day, all of these amazing things that we're doing is so that we can deliver mission and achieve business outcomes. So if you look at change management, so for several years, I led our Lean Agile transformation through our corporate ops program. And with that, we had to think about change management. And we used the ADKAR model from, if you're familiar with it, of awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. However, one of my lessons learned about that, it is not a one-time pass-through. It's not like you build this awareness sessions and you're done. I find that we're constantly revisiting every step along this way because things keep evolving. And from my experience, or at least my observations, if you're not going through this over and over, you might not be improving as much as you need to, because with every improvement, you need to build the awareness, the desire, why are we adopting these new digital capabilities, and then how do we reinforce the behavior so that it is more sustainable. And the other thing that we have learned as we have moved from software, we have moved into cyber physical systems. So working with industry, and Robin and I got on a platform around 2017 in an industry conference, much smaller than this, but we got up there and we were talking about, like, how do we leverage these digital capabilities, the lean, the agile, the systems thinking, and how do we apply that as we are building cyber-physical systems, because I have seen, we have built software, we can actually build software faster. However, if I don't have the hardware platform or the hardware environment that it needs to go get implemented on, then it kind of sits there, right? And you need to constantly test it, but it's not getting to the environment it needs. So how can we take this mindset all the way from the front end of the life cycle and move it all the way through into manufacturing and into operations, so we have a constant feedback, a constant learning, and a constant improvement opportunities. So with industry, we defined these 9 principles. I am not going to go through all of them now, but we have found that they have been instrumental and very important in terms of, again, not just looking at it from a software lens, but looking at it from a systems. And I'm going to turn it over to Robin, because she's going to talk about how we take these industrial DevOps principles and then we move it into some application in terms of tools. So thank you.
Thank you, Suzette. Our next panelist is Dr. Robin Yeaman from the Carnegie Mellon Software Executive Institute, and also a co-author of Industrial DevOps.
Hey, so great to be here. Thank you very much for taking the time. Before we get started, I just have a couple questions for you guys. All right, so how many of you have a model-based systems engineering initiative? How many of you have a cyber initiative? How many of you have an agile initiative? How many of you have a DevOps initiative? Does anybody have a cloud initiative? What about a MOSA open systems initiative? So here's the deal. In my opinion, we're coming up with these great capabilities, right? We're leveraging artificial intelligence, we're leveraging machine learning, but we're doing it independently, all right? So I, as a systems engineer, I'm all about, my MBSE, I'm building amazing models. Me as a software engineer, I am all about my agile approach and how I can deliver. Me as a cybersecurity, I want to make sure things are secure. I am all about RMF and securing the system. But it's still taking us upwards of 9 to 10 years to launch a new satellite, right? And I really think it's not because we're not brilliant. It's not because we're not coming up with great ideas. It's because we haven't brought all of the tools in our toolbox together, right? So in actuality, in order to really deliver a mission-critical capability to the warfighter, I need to use all of these, right? I need to be able to optimize my planning and use that multiple horizons of planning, right? I need to bring together my short-term plan and my long-term plan. I actually need to really understand how I can bring my requirements and put those into a model. I have to be able to take that and build rapid, resilient software, which requires us to put it all together. One of the things I ask all the time, and I haven't been able to do it, so you'll have to help me out here, is I'm like, wouldn't it be great if we could build a CubeSat together? Right? Wouldn't it be great if I could have a class and on day 1 we could start updating requirements, whether that be in Doors or Jira or Excel, I don't care. And wouldn't it be awesome on day 2 if we could take those requirements and update our models, whether that be in MATLAB or Cameo or pick your tool du jour. Day 3, we could take those models and we could update or use it to inform our digital twin. That'd be cool. On day 4, maybe we could build automated tests, right? We could set up all of those different automated tests. And on day 5, we could implement capabilities, whether it be in firmware or hardware through rapid prototyping or software. And I think that if we could do that, you guys would have the opportunity to see how those handoffs are really causing problems. Now, I was really lucky, and I had the opportunity, to be a senior tech fellow at Lockheed Martin, which let me see how these systems come together. And a lot of people only see their piece of the system. They never see all of the pieces come together. And over, I see the handoffs, where, just as Suzette was talking about, where hardware sits or software sits. What I really like is where we have the software and then we put it on the shelf because we did really well, and then we update the hardware, and then we have parts that went end of life, so then we had to change the hardware, which then meant we pulled the software off the shelf and we had to make updates there. So really, from a digital transformation perspective, the key that I would like you to take away from this talk is we need to put all of the tools in our toolbox, leverage that across the digital engineering value stream for the goal of optimizing delivery. Not for the goal of being digital or the goal of being agile or the goal of being MBSE or anything. For the goal of delivering mission-critical capability to the warfighter in the shortest sustainable lead time possible. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And our last panelist is Miss Alexis Bonnell. Alexis is the Chief Information Officer for the Air Force Research Laboratory and also the Director of the Digital Capabilities Directorate. Over to you,
Thank you. Thanks so much. I love being able to maybe reflect on what my fellow panelists have said and maybe drive home one of the most important parts. And that is that digital transformation is human transformation. What in essence we do when we go on a digital journey is we navigate people's identity and ask them to in essence become more or have augmentation or other types of behavioral changes as we ask them to embrace what technology is capable of. But what we become really good at is we become really good at telling people to do differently. But in human transformation, we actually also have to help them think differently, feel differently, perceive themselves differently. And so as we've been navigating, especially tools like AI and other types of things, one of the most incredible things we've gotten to learn is what is it that we have to adapt? What is it that we're asking people to do differently? And so, what I outlined here, and for those of you that can join post this, I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about kind of the AI journey specifically. But in particular, one of the things I wanted to highlight is before this job, I had the great pleasure of serving at Google as the emerging technology evangelist during COVID, where you can imagine I did nothing every day but sit with incredible leaders who are trying to navigate what it looked like to have digital transformation in a time of crisis. I'm going to highlight for you that I saw two really interesting leadership behaviors. The first was the leader who came and who in essence really came with the mentality of, what do I need to do to survive this moment until it all goes back to normal, right? Until what I engineered, like we put it back in place and we know and when we do the process again. The second really was what I saw as a new type of leader. This was what I kind of reference as a living system leader. Because that leader started to understand in that moment that nothing was ever going to go back to normal. That in fact, their job was now to navigate change. That was it, right? To navigate change. And I highlight this because a lot of times we talk about technology, we talk about things, but we talk about it in the absence of why it matters, what's changed, why now. So I'd highlight a few things before going over these four. The first is that the game board completely shifted in the last 4 years. And what I mean by that, and probably 5, I guess now, what I mean by that is, first of all, our maturity horizon shrank. We used to be able to have cadence and have the right answer. Right now, we're working with right for now. And what that means is a 5 to 15-year maturity is now a 5-month to 8-month maturity cycle. That means constant change, constant adaptation, constant instances of identity shift. But what that also means, if we compound that, I want you to think about the fact that right now, Russia is countering Ukraine software in 2 weeks. We're talking about a 2-week change cycle, right? And this matters because the systems that we create, the engineering that we do, has to adapt. The second thing that changed fundamentally is that as an individual, if I accept that change horizon, as an individual, you are now making 5 times more decisions than you did in the last 5 to 7 years. So I want you to think about that human cognitive load of what it is to show up in an ever-changing environment. And to do that with empathy, as was mentioned, for others that you're asking to adapt to your process and system. The third, and probably the most fundamental one, and this is a little bit about why AI, why now. The third is that for the first time in human history, we have access to all information and knowledge in our play. And what I mean by that is up until this point, especially for those of you that are familiar with government or large organizations, our relationship with knowledge and the way the technology enabled us was in essence one of structure and control, right? I want to perfectly organize, structure, control the information that I use. That made sense with the technology we had at the time, but I want you to think about something really, really risky about that. Does anyone have a guess about what percentage on average, DoD has of its knowledge structured? Any guesses? Oh, sorry? 15. It's about 6. So I want you to think about the level of confidence of decisions we're making with 6% of our knowledge in play. Now, when you introduce things like large language models and things like that, it's not about the AI. What it's about is the relationship with knowledge that we can now have, meaning I, for the first time in human history, can put all of the knowledge in play, structured, unstructured. What that means is I have an opportunity in digital transformation to move from having a relationship with knowledge that is one of control to a relationship with knowledge that is one of curiosity, right? And the interesting question starts to become, well, it depends which question you ask, right? So if I am trying to do an audit and 2 + 2 needs to equal 4, or the physics actually has to work, then a controlled relationship with information makes sense. But if I'm asking what might the adversary do, the reality is there's no right answer, right? A curiosity-based relationship makes sense. And so what I'm trying to share with you is it's really important as we navigate all of the types of factors and forms that we put around, we also have to recognize what's changed, what's being asked of us. And I'd highlight really quickly on this. These are kind of 4 things that we've seen. We had the great privilege of introducing one of the first large-scale AI, generative AI tools into kind of the DoD community, Air Force and Space Force. And so we got to watch what it looked like for thousands of people to go on a journey with this collective curiosity-based relationship with information. So I'm going to tell you what we learned. The first is when you introduce a technology and you're asking someone to change their identity, you actually have to take them on the journey. So the first is these 4 stages in relationship with technology. You have to give them a ta-da, meaning they actually have to use the tool, test it, try it, have an experience with it. The second thing that happens is you have to expect them to have an uh-oh, right? What does this mean? How does this change something? And you have to be willing to actually intentionally walk them through that because it's a really important step. What we were doing wrong in AI is we were putting the uh-oh before the ta-da, right? Imagine if we had tried to regulate the car and get every single thing perfect before we put, anyone behind the wheel. The reality is that's not how human discovery and development works. And yet, for a lot of reasons, that's what we did. And so we learned very clearly, you have to have a ta-da before you can have good questions that you actually use in the uh-oh. The third was how do we give people an aha? Meaning the technology is bullshit. Excuse me, it's probably recorded. Technology is bullshit if it doesn't help people, right? If we're optimizing things that don't matter or aren't relevant or aren't helping people. And so the aha is actually where we found we really have to give people a specific what's in it for me with this technology. So what I mean by that is when we did, for example, role-based training for acquisitions professionals, all of a sudden, they got it, right? Because we're talking about the technology in a lens that mattered to them, their identity and role. And the final thing I would just say is that as you go through this process, one of the things you want to look for is the progression of adaptation. So I will leave you, and we'll go to Q&A now, but I'll leave you with, one of the things you have to be ready for, specifically in emerging technology, is people will want to do pain, prioritization, process adaptation, and then proxy. So if you want to know more about that, we'll talk more. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so now there's a QR code up on the screen here, so we encourage everyone to enter their questions. And as your moderator, I will be asking the questions, but while we wait for questions to come in, I think, Alexis, you bring up a very interesting concept around moving from control to curiosity. So I thought we would start by just having the other panelists comment on what do you think about that? We'll start with Robin.
I actually think it's brilliant because, again, just as Alexis was saying, if I wasn't curious, if I didn't try something, I don't even have a question to ask. We tend to, well, I believe, overthink things. And so curiosity is what allows us to find that new thing, the thing that I didn't even know existed, right? So I would love to see a lot more of that.
And I think to build off of that, one of the principles of industrial DevOps is applying a growth mindset, which means we recognize we never have it all figured out, which then implies we want continuous improvement, which then leads to, well, obviously, then we're always curious about how we can continuously improve. And when I was talking about the leadership and the impact of leadership, which is so important as part of a transformation, I always listen to the words that the leader is using. And based on the words they use, will then impact how I am about to respond. So for example, if I'm working with a leader who might be sharing their ideas, and they say, well, what do you think? I would like to understand more, or I'm curious about how this would work. Then I know we have an open forum to have an amazing conversation. But if I don't hear those words or hear very little of those words, then when I'm working with that individual, I only take little baby steps to see how willing are they able to embrace change, how curious are they of learning new technologies or new ways of working. And I think so language is an important element of that, and then really listening so I spend a lot of my time out working with people. So listening to those key words about how curious they are and how far you can take them to that next step.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to echo the same remarks. I think being curious is the only way we're going to innovate. And for people to innovate, they need to feel safe that it's okay to fail, that they don't need to get the right solution from the get-go. It's very much going to be a kind of a spiral development to this. That means we also need to have people who are comfortable in ambiguity and knowing that, understanding and accepting that they don't know it all from the beginning, and understanding what they can do with the knowledge that they have. So we need to really kind of foster those environments where we empower people to use the knowledge they have, we tell them it's okay to fail, and we allow them to learn from their failures so they can move forward.
Thank you. Great. So the next one is we'll start with Olivia. So Olivia, as we talk through workforce development for digital engineering and digital transformation, and again, that idea of going from control to curiosity, what are some of the challenges that you see in terms of how do we prepare that workforce to shift from a training that was very much we're teaching you this rigorous thing that do it exactly this way versus this more open-ended kind kind of?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. I think traditionally we gain our knowledge from a limited set of people, right? And in academia, it's like, all right, you have the professor who go and preaches, and you gain that knowledge, that understanding through that relationship. Now knowledge is everywhere. It's around us. It's not just the person we're talking to in the same room. It's people across organizations, across other boundaries, and so helping students understand and how they can leverage the kind of collective intelligence that is out there, and how they can use this to address problems. So understanding that it's not just about what you know, it's about how you're going to leverage what you know to address new problems. And so we're trying early on, at least in our program, to put them in front of open-ended problems. Problems that you guys are facing every day, right? There's not one obvious solution or even just one solution. And how can they go and decompose the problem and provide a solution that address some of the challenges and the issues? So how do you take your knowledge and your understanding of the problem to address issues? And then again, it's about also not just preaching but doing. So we teach them about those digital constructs, right? What is a digital twin? What is a digital thread? But then we put them in situation where they have to go implement and develop some of those things, right? So now they understand that interoperability across tools is not a given. You have to work your way around this, that data standards are important, that data curation is key if you actually want to go do AI later on. So it's really, leveraging, making them comfortable in situation where they don't know the answer to the problem, and making sure they understand the in and out of the processes, methodologies, and tools they're going to be using.
Fantastic, thank you. And so related to that, for Suzette and Robin, from the industry perspective, how are you seeing that play out as you educate the workforce that's already internal to a large OEM, for example?
Yeah, so I'll start with, when it comes to educating and training the workforce, so I've spent this is one of the things I study on Friday evenings at the end of the week, because there are so many modes of learning right now. There's the micro learning and learning in the moment. There's the on-the-job learning. But then there's also some people that hey, I still want to get together with my team and let's go through these processes together at a team. So there's so many different variations of how people learn and how people want to learn and learning in the moment. So I recently took you might be familiar with MIT's professional education. They've got this digital transformation certificate. And I went through that 10 months, which was another form of learning, because what I wanted to figure out is what are my gaps? I'm curious to what are people, because it's very international, what are people around the globe looking at with digital transformation? Are they experiencing the same problems? But that helps a very broad perspective, not necessarily something I would go take on the job tomorrow, but something that's going to feed into my learning journey. So I think it's really important to understand that we need sort of multiple modes of learning, from learning in the moment. If I need to know how to use a tool and how do I want to find something or to create an algorithm, I want to be able to grab something quickly and figure it out. But then there's also the more of what Robin was talking about, which was similar to when we had dojos right before the pandemic, where we get the team together for a week and we would go through and teach them their processes. That also had another mode of learning. We have trained over 60,000 people on our foundational agile practices, but that also has shifted in how we do it, from only in the classroom to also now having a virtual presence. Sometimes we even do hybrid. So I think when you're looking at training and development, and that is not my area of specialty, I just kind of fell into some of that with these transformations. It's really understanding what is the need of the groups and have different options based upon what they're facing today and helping them along that journey. There's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution to education and training the workforce.
So one of the things that I think is pretty interesting as we've been doing training is externally, right? So I've had the opportunity, right, to be an accidental consultant and worked, a little bit with commercial. For the most part, I've primarily worked with government. And they get training or learning because they have a goal, they've got a purpose, they have a thing that they have to do. They need to, get this product out the door, they need, something internally. So within the government space and government contractors, what I find is we are learning, but not in the goal to deliver a mission, but we learn like Agile, or we learn modeling, and we ask, hey, is this the right way to model? Is this the right way to do Agile? Is this the right way? And because we're not applying it necessarily to a purpose, we come up with kind of a lot of misunderstandings. So I think really one of the things we want to focus on or should focus on is really learning in pursuit of a purpose or an outcome that we can help with versus I want to learn just because. I mean, not that I don't want to learn just because, I do, but really focusing on what is the purpose that I need this information for? What am I trying to do?
So, and Alexis, from not just the AFRL perspective, but the Department of the Air Force perspective, what are you observing and how are you approaching that?
So I think one thing that I'm observing, which is really exciting, is that we talk about diversity a lot, and I would actually ask us to expand the idea of diversity in digital transformation in light of the technologies that are coming out. So I think in particular, one of the things that has been most interesting to me as I've watched different people use AI is everyone assumes that the best people who are going to be the best queryers, the best users of AI are data scientists, are coders or developers. Actually, some of the most naturally gifted people with AI are moms. Because moms are very used to, for those of you in the room who share motherhood with me, we're very used to, in essence, saying, let me ask that question differently. Right? Like, we don't necessarily believe everything we hear, right? And so interestingly, when you think about, for example, the mission of defense, and you think about our larger collective talent pool, it makes me think, wow, when I think about those military spouses, maybe there's an entirely new talent track here that I can be bringing in when I'm thinking about, leveraging technology. So I would say the first thing we have to do is be willing to understand that as the digital transformation takes hold, the next programming language is likely going to be English. Right? I mean, so there's just these really interesting things, and we can, as was pointed out, we can kind of reject them or say we like them or don't, or we can say what new opportunity, right, does this bring to us? What new model does it introduce? The last thing I would say is one of the interesting things that I've observed over the past 10 years. So there's what we want people to know. There's what, the knowledge they show up with, the roles we want them to do. I think it's equally important to ask them and to think for ourselves, who do we want them to be? What are the values and the mindsets we want them to bring? And in the last 10 years, something happened that I think is something we really all need to pay attention to. And that is somehow we started giving more oxygen, more nourishment, more time, more airtime to the critic versus the doer. Meaning, if you think about it, if you watch the news, you don't watch the news, you watch 2 to 5 people's opinion about what's happening. When you watch sports, you don't really, you watch the game, but then you see 6 ex-athletes' commentary, right, about the game. When you're in social media or taking in things, people feel, and we really reward this idea of being critical. And I would postulate that actually is really dangerous, when we think about curiosity and we think about discovery, because as a potential innovator or as someone who really, if you think about it from a DoD context, we have to ask and answer what if faster than the adversary, which means the behavior I need, not just at AFRL, but across, all of DAF is curiosity. I need time. I need space to without advantage. And if what happens though emotionally is that if what I have to navigate is not just the normal bureaucracy and the process, but if I know that every time I go in, I also emotionally have to navigate there's nothing negative about critique. But there's a difference between critique in order to solve and advance and being a critic, right? And so I would really encourage us to think about not just what are the technologies, but what are the behaviors and what are we going to give oxygen to? And one of the things that I've really enjoyed, as a closer at AFRL is I had to make a decision as a leader, am I going to give time to the people who are doing, who are trying, whether or not they do well, whether or not they fail, because my time is precious. Am I going to invest it in those that are doing, willing to take the risk, or am I going to invest it in the critic or the naysayer or those that I have to bring along? And just candidly, the reality is I think if we don't start to index and make doing and discovery and those types of behaviors, the hero, the champion, and instead and limit, the amount of time and energy that we give to that critic role, we're going to find ourselves continuing to talk a lot and not doing or achieving anything of significance. So I think there's just something there, that is important for us to think about.
Thank you. And so that's an excellent segue to a whole host of questions that I'm going to group under the resistance or the resistors. And so there's a question about how do you approach teams who are unwilling to change. There's questions about from the individual level if they have a fear of being replaced or a fear of not being able to use the technology. And then there's two that are related to leadership and management. One is about how do you approach leadership that doesn't see the value, but the other one is one that I have experienced firsthand, and maybe I'm the poster child for it in some ways. Management often embraces a technology until they need to use it. So how do we get management to use what they embrace? And so just in that general theme, let's start with Robin this time.
So resistance, I'm very familiar with it. One of the things that I had the opportunity is to implement Agile for a government customer because they required it, right? RFP in 2002, right? So I was pretty much an early adopter, not by choice, but just because. And I really liked it so much that I had to, I brought it everywhere across Lockheed. Now, any of you who are familiar with Lockheed know that they're not always, bleeding edge. They're risk averse for good reason. And one of the things I noticed about, resistance, for example, a good example is as I was working with the F-16 Taiwan retrofit team. And, their leader, just like you said, they said, we're gonna go all Agile for Taiwan retrofit. And, the aerospace engineers that had been working at F-16 for decades pretty much rolled their eyes. They were not interested, right? So I got to be the first person that they talked to right after. They learned they were going to go Agile. And they told me, you don't understand, and we're different, which is pretty true. So I explained to them, I'm like, I know. Here's the thing. Give me a couple weeks, and I can go back to your leader and tell him it doesn't work, right? I totally get you. So I kind of bypassed their resistance because, we were playing the same game. Lessons learned, short story turned around is 8 months later they delivered on a project that was supposed to take about 14 months, and they absolutely loved it. Now that being said, every leader, or the majority of them across, the organization that I worked with, would send their teams to training. And, they would learn things like how to do Agile or how to do DevOps. Now here's the interesting thing. Almost none, I could say less than one hand, would actually do the training themselves. They would always not have time. They were like, hey, can you just give me that in a 2 hour? Can you just give me a 1 hour? Maybe you get 30 minutes. So it's never actually been, at least from my experience, a priority for many of the leaders. Actually, one of the leaders that did stay and get trained, I was joking, I started the class, and I said, "Oh, I'm so glad that you're going to be here, Tom, because my managers never stay." And I found out later, it's because he felt so guilty he had no intention of staying. So.
Excellent. Alexis?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why specifically, so when we were introducing, this LLM tool, people thought that having a tool was the goal, and it wasn't. The goal was actually to have something that people could touch and use in order to take them on the psychological journey from being afraid or maybe feeling like not enough or having concerns to, quite frankly, being bored, right? My goal is actually, for someone to come to me and be like, to in essence have embraced that technology and want the next thing, right? And say, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do this. And there's no shortage of that given the commercial technology that's available versus government. So I think, a couple things are really important that were said. The first is story matters. So I'll give you, an example that exemplifies this. We have a new tool that we are rolling out around AI and acquisitions. I want you to imagine what I really need is the acquisitions professionals to embrace this, right? Imagine if I put out something. So one of the things we do is we actually make everyone write, and every group of stakeholders, the idea of bringing stakeholders together, we make them write a press release when we start on a technology journey so that everyone at the table understands what the definition and equities of success are, regardless of what your role is. But in that press release, you can imagine if something said, this AI acquisition tool will fundamentally, fix the broken, acquisition system, and we'll take all of the, make everything faster, and the tool will solve it all, and will be revolutionary. Imagine for a minute having the empathy and respect of the acquisition professionals, and in essence what we're saying is, you've been doing a bad job, you're broken. That's not very nice. It's not very kind to think about, the technology even in that way, as an anti-solution to the talent we have. Instead, what we do is we say, our acquisition professionals are the best in the world. They are the key to how we will win this fight, future fights, and without them, nothing happens. But they are also overwhelmed. They are overworked, and if we are not taking every modern tool out of respect for them and bending it to their mission so that they can bring the best of themselves every day, then we have missed the mark. And so this tool is our best attempt so far, acquisition professionals, to honor you, to hopefully make your life easier. Tell us it's not going to be perfect, but you are that important. I want you to think for a minute about the difference in the same tool. Right? But the difference in what it is to be kind, to honor that person, and to think about the technology as an augmentation and a complement to them. So, I think the big thing is understand what the undeniable narrative is. Understand who the person you're taking through this journey is and how they want to feel or be seen at the end of it. And if you adapt that, the technology and the transformation becomes very easy.
Now, Suzette, I want to change the question a little bit for you and say, so we've been talking about the resistance and the resist doors. Do you have any specific examples you can share about how you engaged with either a management team, an executing team, or an individual to take them on that journey and help them overcome that fear?
So there's a couple, as I was listening, there were so many thoughts that went through my mind. I was wishing I had a pencil so I could organize them, so I could share them in a more logical order. But as part of my journey, so if you are familiar with the diffusion of innovation or the adoption of innovations, right? I am on the left side of that chasm between innovator, early adopter, right? And then you have early majority, and you know, as you're crossing the chasm, and And the reason that, if you're not familiar with that, and you are interested in change management, I would recommend becoming familiar with that. And here's why. Because it was a learning process for me. So for example, it was around 2009. I went out to one of our sites, and we did some agile training and some talking and meeting with people. And this individual came up to me during one of the breaks, and they asked this question, and he's like, "Can you show me case studies where this has worked before?" And I just stood there, and I tell people, I would not have been any more surprised if there had been alien from Mars standing at the door when I was asked that question. Why is that? It is not a bad question. It is a very real question, but I had to stop and do some analysis, like self-reflection, like, why am I so shocked at such a reasonable question? And that's because if I'm the innovator, I don't look for anybody else's success to determine my success. That's where I grew up, the type of people I grew up. We were very innovative because we had to field capabilities quickly out to the field. So we weren't looking at how other people were successful. We defined our own success because we had to, and they were very successful. But that was really important. Because then I realized after, go back home, I go into my introverted self for a little bit and do a lot of research. And then I understand as organizations shift, right, to the early majority, you have to have a foundation in place in the organization to meet that need. You need to be able to share the stories and the learnings from others in the organization so that they can learn from each other. You also need to have in place, which is very related to what we were just talking about, a foundation that makes it easier for them for when they're ready. For resistors, I focus on who my strong influences are, and I focus on those who really want to go make that difference. And then for the others that aren't ready yet, I just keep inviting them to opportunities to have a discussion. And that is also why, so for example, one time I went into this program, I hadn't even said a word. Like literally, I had said nothing. And the first thing somebody says is, "We're not going to be agile." And I'm just like, I haven't even said anything yet. But okay, I'm glad I know where we stand. So I thought, let's just talk about the principles instead, right? And so we just looked at it from principles, because the principles are really hard to dispute. Like, do you want regular feedback from your user community or from your customer? Do you want regular visibility of progress? Right? Do you want to iterate so that you can see not just activities completed, but actually something you can demonstrate in one of your digital virtual environments? Like, and what is important, and what problem are we trying to solve? And then I focus those conversations around the problem you're trying to solve, because at the end of the day, I mean, I care but I don't care. Like, I don't care if you're doing Scrum, right? That's like a really nice, great framework. I have no problem with the framework if that's gonna help solve the problem. But I really just wanna focus on the principles and help them solve their problem, whatever it is. And let's start there and make whatever that bottleneck is just a little bit better.
Excellent. And so, Olivia, I think you're probably thinking the same thing that I am, is that conversation really summarized in quite a nice way the workforce development position paper. And so if you just want to make sort of some summarizing remarks on how this is all going to play in and what comes next.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's absolutely a topic we touch on the paper. There's also a topic we discussed yesterday as part of a panel we had on materials to mission. And I think the message is we need to stop preaching and we need to start doing. And so if you have an idea of what needs to be done, most likely you're not the only one in the organization that has that idea. Go find those doers. Go find the people who are going to go with you on that journey and go demonstrate. So rather than just telling, like we said in the paper, show, demonstrate capability, because it's only by showing tools and capabilities that you're going to be able to convince people. Words are just words. all we do is PowerPoint engineering. We need to stop the PowerPoint engineering. We need to actually go start developing capabilities, because that's only how you're going to convince people that this is the right way to go. And understand also that you don't need to have the perfect product before you go and reach out to your leadership and say, this is the way we need to go. Start with something, even small, but make sure you involve the right people in the process. Make sure you involve people who understand what it is that you're trying to do, and just go do it.
Excellent. All right, so there's also some questions here that start to talk about not just the individuals, the managers, the organizations, the teams, but also the interchange between, for example, regulatory and government clients and the entire supply chain and academia. So not sure exactly how to formulate that into a question, but I think it's probably better for a discussion topic on where do you think we are with that? Do you think we're doing enough to make sure we're ready for that? And do you have any specific ideas for how we could tackle that specific pain point around the new ways of working when you're crossing organizational boundaries beyond a single company or organization?
So someday I'm going to finish this paper, and currently one of the things that I've been working on is I built a model in a slate, which is a life cycle modeling. It's got it's got life cycle model and SysML. And I built a mid-size LEO satellite, so I can give you all the specs. I took that and built the requirements for it, and I built it two ways. One, I took NASA's waterfall approach end to end, right from their systems engineering book, and built it exactly as the way they described. And then I built the same satellite, because I linked the same requirements, using a series of MVPs, so I think roughly 9 MVPs. And one of the problems I ran into is the regulatory requirements, right? The regulatory and safety requirements, because currently the way that they're evaluated are at phase gates, right? They're at SRR, PDR, CDR, ORR, TRR, right? That's when we evaluate them. And so what I had to do to make sure that I could meet all of the regulatory requirements is I had to go back and grab all of the things that we evaluate at those different phase gates. Well, then I had another problem, which is there's a lot of repetition. We actually would have to completely change how we evaluate safety and regulatory compliance in order to do it in an iterative and incremental manner. So it took me a while. But anyway, I currently have this model, and the cool thing about it is the Agile MVP approach takes roughly 1/3 of the time to build. So I've got the two, they run a Monte Carlo analysis, and when I build the satellite, it takes 3 times as long for my NASA approach. And then I was able to add resources to it, so it's actually 1/4 the cost to build the same satellite. And I'm sure that I got a bunch wrong, but I put in all of the regulatory evaluation in each of those MVPs. So long story short, the thing that I think has to be done is actually rethinking the entire way we evaluate regulatory compliance and safety. Because the easiest way for somebody to say not to change is, don't you want to be safe? Have you ever heard that? Because I totally have. Yes, I absolutely do, but I have to rethink how I'm doing it.
And so, Alexis, I'm going to ask you to follow up on that, specifically with your experience around being an authorizing official and working through cybersecurity, and that idea, even though this is largely internal to Department of the Air Force, that early and often engagement and changing not only the way the people developing the new capabilities are working, but also how the regulators, in this case the cybersecurity world, is handling that.
Yeah, so I did not realize when taking this job that I was also going to be taking on being the authorizing official. I will just tell you that is like the worst job in government. Like, you should go and hug your AO. And the reason for that is because if you think about the identity, you are the villain of every story. right? You never, ever get to be the hero of the story. You are always the villain. And I think what was really important about that, for me is probably two things. The first thing is like, okay, I own this. Right? So I actually have, within some semblance of my power, the ability to say, well, what does it look like to go from being the villain to thinking about being a more positive contributor? And so the team, is really looking at now, for example, is like security as a service. Like maybe not everyone has to become a cyber expert. Maybe we can lean in and figure out how we can help them earlier make better, decisions, give them better resources, but ultimately take, that pain and that sting away where we can. I think the second is, we really have to understand the incentive structure that we create around regulation. So as an AO, I have really no incentive to approve anything, right? Because this is nothing but risk for me. And so I think one of the things that, we really have to embody, and one of the elements that I'm reflecting on is this role, and the role that I play is both critical to securing things, but also it is the biggest threat to our national security. Because nothing goes out without, me and others, like me in the regulatory framework, approving things. And so I really think that this is a chance to ask myself, like, wow, if I take it that seriously, what does it look like to actually not, be the threat, to meet the moment, to get things out quickly? And so I think, I am not alone in that. There are a lot of other AOs who realize this, and I think who now collectively are creating a bit of a wonderful cabal to say, how could this look different? I would say the other element, of that in particular is you really have to have a grounding in what matters. So you've heard a couple times now on the panel, the point is, what are we actually trying to do and achieve? And you'll see that, I wear and give out, if you want one, these wristbands. And part of this is to anchor, my team, my unit, our community, to be able to ask the important things. And particularly in digital, that might be, how do we give people more minutes on mission back, right? How do we tackle the toil so that you have time to do that discovery? But the most important one is there's an acronym that in essence, is WIDTIW. And what that means is, would I do this in war? Would I do this in war? Like, we have to play the practice match as if it is the big game. And so I think what that does when we think about regulation, when we think about all of this, it really forces us to ask, is this the most important thing? Would I do this when it matters? And if the answer is no, I would actually do X, then I think it's an opportunity for us really to say, okay, if that's the reality, then we've got to be willing to rethink this. And my final point would be specifically from a policy and regulation point. If you want something to grow, right? If, for example, we want AI to take its place as a prolific augmentation and partner for us in our national security, advantage, then the policy actually has to get simpler every month, not more complex, because you're asking more people to navigate, right? More people to participate in that. And so I think one of the things we're going to have to do is understand that as we want something to be prolific, we actually have to simplify the regulation, simplify the process, and use even more human, basic, relatable language so that those fear blockers are removed and people can understand more clearly, how am I expected to show up in this moment in this way?
Excellent. And so, Olivia, I want to build on that a little bit. Alexis talked about bringing in people that we don't necessarily think of when we're here at DEIC to talk, in this case, the cybersecurity community. But you mentioned the Mission to Materials panel and some of the things that have come out this year that you specifically have been working on to bring different communities together to really tell that story, right? It comes back to the story that people can rally behind and not have the final answer. So would you like to make some comments about, again, a new way of working by bringing communities together?
Yeah, absolutely. Magic really happens when you bring in folks from different walks of life and with different focuses into the room. We had this discussion yesterday in the Materials to Mission panel where we are trying to really articulate the need for different communities to work together and talk together for the greater good and the ability to develop and provide capability to the warfighter. And so that was an opportunity to talk about, what are the common interfaces between those different communities. We had a similar example over the summer where we organized a workshop with operators, maintainers, suppliers, designers to understand, okay, we understand what the problem is, or we think we understand what the common problem is, how do we go about addressing it? And we learn a lot when we have people in the same room talking about what they believe the solution space is, and understand also, okay, there are also some misconception, right? When you start bringing people together, it's like, oh, well, I didn't realize that you needed this at this time, or this is how you're doing it. So again, SciTech is a fantastic opportunity for communities to come together and address problems, and I think we need a lot more of that.
Thank you. All right, we've got just about 4 minutes left, so I'd like to do rapid fire closing thoughts with each of you having about a minute. We'll start with Suzette.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I wasn't quite ready for that. No, I'm just reflecting a lot on the whole conversations, and I think a lot of it starts with why do I need to change? What is the problem I'm trying to solve? And for my background, that was kind of easy because it was all about mission. And I worked with teams who were very driven to deliver that mission, along with being good stewards of the taxpayer dollars who basically pay for the services we provide. So I think it's really important to get around the why and your mission and understanding what problem you're trying to solve and who you're solving that problem for, because that sort of gets to the emotional piece. And then we need to ensure that we are providing capabilities, the infrastructure that is needed to make the job easier to adopt and not so difficult. And provide the support both to the individuals that have to do the job, and then what am I, as a leader, what am I supposed to do to encourage and help my teams be successful? And then it's not just within one organization, but really applying and working across the ecosystem so that we are aligned around some common ways of working, so that it's not just me and my little functional area, but across my functions and across working with my suppliers and really having a common mindset around that. There are a lot of challenges to overcome, but I think there always will be. So I think it's important that we just continue to embrace that mindset of a growth mindset, continuous improvement. And I worked on a program once. We had a lot of challenges early on, but we used to always ask, are we better today than we were yesterday? And what are we going to do tomorrow to be a little bit better than today? And that always kept us moving forward. Thank you. Robin?
So one of the things that I think, I really, especially Alexis telling us, hey, our maturity cycle is 8 months now, exponentially shorter. I think that we are going to have cross-functional skills. We need to look beyond just our specialty boundaries, because I think with the complexity of the systems and the speed that we have to go, that the answers are going to be more in that liminal space, which requires us to kind of cross those boundaries.
Thank you. Alexis?
Yeah. Again, I think digital transformation is human transformation, and think about how you want to show up as a human. Are you showing up with empathy, with kindness, with humble curiosity, to the point of that connective tissue? In order to bring those things together, I actually have to respect what you do. I have to think it's valuable. I have to think bringing something together, is interesting and might, contribute to the mission. And most importantly, I have to have empathy, because if I'm asking, if I'm saying, well, I'm developing an engineering model, and now everyone has to do 666 steps. Well, they also have to do 1,400 cyber controls, and they also have to do X. So I think starting with a reality of what are we really asking of people is critical.
Excellent. And Olivia?
Yeah, so I think digital transformation is a continuous transformation. It's not just something we do at kind of a specific point in time. And again, I think we need to empower people to try things out, be curious, and stop just talking about it and go do it.
Excellent. So let's give all our panelists a big round of applause. And on behalf of AIAA, we have a coin for each of you. Thank you.